The content on the Unitales channel is protected by copyright. Unauthorized use may result in legal liability. I choked on the icy water, feeling the sharp pain shooting through my head. The air rushed into my lungs in spurts, as if each breath might be my last. The water was everywhere, cold, merciless, clinging to my body like it was trying to drag me to the bottom. Where am I? Why? I couldn't figure out how I'd gotten from the calm comfort of my familiar world into this hellish void. The wind roared over the lake, stirring up ripples in the water, and the pines on the shore bent under its pressure, creaking. I couldn't feel my arms. My body slowly sank, and only a vague warmth somewhere in my chest reminded me that I was still alive. Or maybe not anymore. My thoughts were spinning chaotically, making it hard to focus. Elvira. Her face, her voice, they came back to me like a whiplash. The smile that had so many lies hidden behind the affectionate words. How many times had I trusted that smile? Looked in her eyes without noticing that they had long since lost their warmth. I closed my eyes, trying to put the image out of my mind. But instead I saw something else. In the darkness, a little farther from the shore, I noticed two glowing eyes. They flashed in the night like two cold stars, watching me intently. I couldn't make out a silhouette, but that gaze was alien, frightening, and yet inescapably alluring. Something inside me made me freeze. An overwhelming sensation, as if those eyes knew more about me than I knew myself. They didn't move, but their presence burned, piercing through the cold of the lake and the wind. I tried to move, to twitch, but the strength was gone. Only the silence around me and those two glowing eyes that seemed to be watching what would happen to me next. I was born in a small town on the edge of the forest, where everyone knew each other by name and life went on in the rhythm of nature. The forest started right behind our house, and its noise was my first memory. The hum of pine trees, the rustle of leaves, the crackle of twigs. It all seemed part of something bigger, as if the forest had a life of its own, in which I was not an observer, but a participant. Ever since I was a child, I had been drawn to nature. The lake where I first went with my father became my secret refuge. It was deep, transparent, with a sandy shore and dense pine trees all around. Time stopped here. I would sit for hours on an old log by the shore, throwing pebbles into the water and watching the circles diverge on its surface. But nature was more than just a place for me. It was something native, almost alive. At night, I often had strange dreams. I saw the forest. Only in it everything was different. The colors were brighter, the air was thicker, the sounds were louder. And always in these dreams, there was a wolf. He was huge, with fur the color of silver and eyes as blue as the summer sky. He would stand on a hill or by the water and look right at me. I never felt threatened by him. On the contrary, it was as if he knew me as I knew him. During the day, I often thought about my dreams. Then it seemed to me that this wolf was my friend, my protector. I even talked to him out loud while running through the woods or playing by the lake. I can't help but mention a girl who was an integral part of my childhood. Her name was Anna, and she lived across the street. We were almost the same age and had been inseparable since childhood. She was thin, with long blonde braids and eyes that always sparkled with curiosity. Anna loved the lake too. We often ran away there despite our parents' prohibitions. She always thought of something to play. We would build huts, catch tadpoles in the coastal water, or imagine that we were explorers discovering a new world. "Look, there's a magic tree," she would say, pointing to an old oak tree whose branches were intertwined in an unusual shape. "If you touch it and make a wish, it will come true." I laughed, but I always touched the tree, making a simple wish like to catch a big fish or to win a game of catch-up just in case. One day we went so far into the woods that we came out on the other side of the lake. There was a hill that overlooked the entire expanse of water. Anna stopped and squinted and looked into the distance. "What do you think is beyond the forest?" she asked. "Probably more woods," I answered without thinking. "No, there's something more there. I'm sure of it." Her words seemed funny to me at the time, but they were memorable. There was something in her voice that made me believe she knew something I didn't. That's how my childhood years passed. In games, trips to the lake, and endless conversations with Anna. The nature around me seemed eternal and unchanging. The forest, the lake, the birds, the rustle of the wind. All this became a part of me, my world, which I considered immutable. But life rarely stays so simple. Time passed, and the world that had seemed so solid to me began to change. Youth crept up unnoticed, and with it everything that came with it. New interests, new people, new temptations. By the time I turned 14, I began to lose touch with the natural world that had been everything to me as a child. The forest, the lake, and even my dreams with the wolf remained somewhere far away, like part of a story I had read but no longer felt. Anna moved away when I was 12. Her father got a job in the big city, and their family packed up in literally 1 week. I remember standing on the curb, watching their car disappear around the corner. We didn't say goodbye properly, because I didn't know then that this was the end. In those first few months, I missed her. I looked for her in our favorite places by the lake, but everything seemed empty. I remembered her laughter, her sincerity, the way she saw the world. But life went on, and I gradually learned to do without her. By the time I was 15, my world was a completely different place. I no longer spent my time taking long walks in the woods. Instead, I started hanging out with kids from school who knew how to have fun. We'd gather in an old barn on the outskirts of town, listen to loud music, drink cheap beer, and dream of future adulthood. Girls began to occupy more and more space in my thoughts, too. Unlike Anna, they were not interested in the forest or the lake. They wore short skirts, tight jeans, and screaming tops that showed more than they hid, but did so with defiance. Their confidence attracted like a magnet. I met one such girl. Her name was Rachel. She was 2 years older than me, with long dark hair and eyes that sparkled in the dark. Her scent, her voice, the way she laughed and touched my hands confused me. We started dating, if you could call it that. She loved being the center of attention, and I loved that I was part of her world. With Rachel, everything was new. She showed me how to enjoy life in the here and now without thinking about the consequences. We would sneak out of class to sit for hours at the local diner where everyone knew her by name. She taught me how to drink coffee with a cigarette, told me about her dream of one day running away to Los Angeles to shine on stage. But there were other girls just as confident, with equally bright smiles and provocative clothes. With each of them, I felt more mature, more important. They hung around us, laughing at our jokes, sharing our time at clubs or parties. It was all addictive. I started taking less time for myself, for my health. Morning jogs were replaced by long nights spent on the streets. Instead of walks in the woods, I spent my time in smoky rooms filled with music and voices. And yet, somewhere in the back of my mind, I sometimes thought of Anna, especially in those rare moments when the city was quiet and I happened to stumble across old photographs or hear a song she loved. These thoughts were not sad, but filled with warm nostalgia. Anna seemed to personify the part of me that I had left behind. I imagined her living in a new city, perhaps having already forgotten about our childhood games and the lake. But sometimes I wondered if she remembered me as I remembered her. My youth was bright, intense, full of discoveries and mistakes. After school, I almost immediately went into the army. Life suddenly acquired a strict rhythm. Rising at dawn, training, following orders. Everything was crisp, clear, without unnecessary thinking. There, in those barracks, on the formation, and in the endless marches, I realized that I was used to live as circumstances demanded, without asking questions. 2 years of service flew by like an instant. The army was predictable. Even when the anxious moments came, drills, marches, I knew what to expect. There was no room for forests, lakes, or dreams of the past. After demobilization, I took a job in a small office branch of a construction company. The work was not difficult, requiring patience rather than skill. From morning till evening, I sat at the computer, worked on documents, and sometimes traveled to construction sites. Evenings were monotonous. TV, sometimes meetings with friends who also followed the path of like everyone else. Life was gradually developing into a smooth, uncomplicated pattern. I knew that my parents hoped to see me married. My mother especially often said, "It's time to find the one," to start a family. You're not going to be alone all the time. And one day I met Elvira. She was the sister of a colleague from work. At first glance, she reminded me of Anna. Calm, modest, with long blonde hair and a slight smile. Her family was deeply religious, strict in their beliefs. Her father, a man of massive build and low voice, immediately gave the impression of a man who was used to being in control. On the first evening of their acquaintance, Elvira looked almost like an angel. Long skirt, shy look, quiet voice. Her words were permeated with respect and kindness. I thought, here she is, the one, calm, faithful, reliable. We started dating. For the first few months, it was like a beautiful fairy tale. She laughed at my jokes, listened to my stories about childhood and life. She was the epitome of femininity, and in her company, I felt like a strong, protective man. But the closer I got to know her, the faster this image of a pure girl crumbled. I first saw her real one at one of the parties where we went on her initiative. Loud music, flashes of light, a dancing crowd. In the center of this chaos stood Elvira. She was smoking a thin cigarette, smiling, laughing with her friends, dancing as if the music filled her to the last atom. Her movements were full of playfulness, confidence. It was mesmerizing but also confusing. "You're so different tonight," I told her when we were alone for a moment. "Well, I'm not always this quiet." She laughed and put out her cigarette in the nearest ashtray. She wasn't the bright girl I'd picture for myself. She liked dancing, noisy company, partying until morning. Her beauty, her smile, it was intoxicating. And frankly, I was fascinated by her. Every day, I realized more and more that her lightness, her grace, her playfulness were not just character traits, but a way to live, to enjoy. She was different, not at all what I had expected. But I couldn't give up. Her beauty and energy had done their job. I proposed to her after all. At that moment, I was sure it was the right thing to do. We can do this, I thought. I believed that with time her fervor would fade. She would become more calm, like the girl I saw on the first day I met her. But I was wrong. Elvira was 5 years younger than me. At her age, that meant a lot. More energy, less doubt, a relentless desire to live life to the fullest. When we were first married, her vitality seemed like a refreshing breath of air to me. She wasn't afraid to be herself, made new acquaintances easily, and always knew how to keep a conversation going. Our life seemed simple and harmonious at first glance. We rented a small apartment in a residential area. A cozy living room with a soft sofa, an old kitchen set, and a balcony, where Elvira liked to go out in the evenings with a cup of tea. She knew how to create a cozy atmosphere around her. Neatly arranged books, always clean table, pleasant aroma of freshly brewed coffee in the morning. She was an excellent cook. The breakfast she set on the table could compete with restaurant breakfasts. Golden toast, scrambled eggs with herbs, a cup of strong coffee, and her cheerful smile that seemed to say, "Today is going to be a good day." It was moments like that that made me feel happy. But there were other moments, too. Moments that made me wonder. Elvira loved evenings full of noise. I could be tired at work and long for silence. But to her, a quiet evening seemed boring. "Let's go out and have some fun," she often said, and I had to give in. She still loved to dance. We went to clubs where the music was so loud that the walls seemed to shake. I watched her more than I danced. She moved easily, playfully, attracting the eyes of the men around her. Sometimes I was flattered by that, but sometimes there was a strange coldness inside that I didn't understand. There was something else, her ease with other men. She was open, friendly, but sometimes it seemed unnecessary to me. "You're too jealous," she'd say with a smile when I hinted at my anxiety. I tried to convince myself that I was really overreacting, that it was all innocent, but something inside me was still nagging me. One day, coming home from work earlier than usual, I found her on the balcony with a glass of wine and her phone in her hands. She was talking to someone, laughing merrily. When she saw me, she quickly ended the conversation as if nothing had happened. "Who was it?" I asked, taking off my jacket. "A friend. I talk to girls a lot," she said, avoiding my gaze. I quickly put the incident out of my mind, but it left a slight residue. Little things like that, which at first seemed insignificant, began to form a chain. Elvira did not like to share details of her meetings or calls. It was as if she lived her own life, separate from mine, although outwardly everything looked perfect. Still, there were moments for which I loved her. Her smile as she wrapped me in a blanket from early morning, joking that I was her lazy bear. The way she sang to herself while cooking dinner, or the way she arranged spontaneous trips to neighboring towns, turning them into real adventures. In her company, I felt alive, despite all my doubts. But gradually something began to change. I noticed it, but I didn't want to admit it. Or perhaps I was afraid to admit it. As she got older, her energy gradually faded. For the last 7 years, we lived as a quiet married couple. Work, dinners at home, rare trips out of town. Evenings with a glass of wine on the balcony were replaced by the usual dinners in front of the TV. There was always silence in the house, except for the tinkling of spoons against plates or the background of the radio. We tried to have children, year after year. At first we took it lightly. Everything will work out. We just need time. But as time went on, nothing changed. Elvira joked at first. Maybe we just have too many plans. But with each passing month, her smile grew strained. At one point, she couldn't take it anymore and made an appointment for me to see a doctor. I didn't want to do that at the time. I wasn't ready to admit that the problem could have been me. But at the appointment, I was told bluntly, your lifestyle has severely affected your fertility. The likelihood of you being able to conceive a child is extremely low. Those words hit me harder than I expected. I was angry at myself, at my life, at fate. Everything seemed wrong, unfair. I stopped talking about it with Elvira, but inside the thought was eating me up. I felt guilty, useless. A lot had changed in our relationship since then. We still stayed together, but something was gone. It was as if the ease and joy that had once bound us together had dissolved into routine and domestic problems. Quarrels became commonplace. Whether it was over dishes that hadn't been cleaned, or because one of us got home from work too late. Sometimes we just annoyed each other with our presence. There were times when we seemed to lose respect for each other completely. I reproached her for being too demanding. She reproached me for being indifferent. But strangely enough, we always made up. Every time someone made the first move, most often it was her. Elvira could suddenly come over, put her arm around my shoulders and quietly say, "Enough, you know I can't stay mad at you for long." And everything would go back to normal. We continued to live together as a couple, but the passion that had once been between us had long since faded. We became like thousands of other married couples living inertia. Sometimes I thought we were just holding on to each other out of habit, and yet I couldn't imagine life without her. Despite the quarrels, the loss of the former brightness, Elvira remained an important part of my life. But that feeling had changed too. More and more often, I found myself thinking that I didn't love her the way I used to. It was not the kind of love that makes your heart beat faster, but something else calmer but also more fragile. Over time, I was able to save enough money to fulfill one of my longtime dreams, to build a house in the town where I was born. This idea came to me suddenly, but with some special power. I was tired of the hustle and bustle, the endless cars, the noise and monotony of the big city. I wanted to return to a place where everything was simpler, where I could, as once in my childhood, sit by the lake with a fishing rod and at least for a moment feel peace. My wife took this idea with displeasure. For her, life in a big city was synonymous with comfort. An apartment with modern repairs, stores on the side, conveniences, all this was important to her. Moving to a small town seemed like a step backward. "Why do you need this house? We have everything here," she said, looking around our apartment. "In the city, everything is close by, convenient. What's there? A forest, a lake, and a couple of neighbors who wouldn't even care about us." I didn't immediately find something to convince her with. I realized that for Elvira, it was not so much the convenience that mattered, but the impression she made on others. She always liked to brag about new clothes, trips, or even a well-made dinner in front of her friends. And then I said, "They'll build a house that will make every one of your friends jealous. The most beautiful house in town. You'll be able to invite guests and have parties like no one here has ever seen." I saw her eyes soften. The argument, as I'd expected, worked. She didn't say yes right away. but I could see she was interested in the idea. I even had a thought that made me chuckle, how much she cares about other people's opinions. But I was already gripped by the idea. The house in my hometown had become more than just a place to live. It was a chance to find myself, to find the peace I had lost over the years in the city, to return to my roots, to the same boy who ran through the woods and dreamed of a great future. I put all my time and effort into this project. I found a good architect, carefully chose materials, followed every stage of construction. I even went to choose wooden beams for the roof, imagining how I would sit on the veranda in the evenings with a cup of coffee, looking at the forest. Every day spent on the construction site made me feel like I was living again for something important. It was as if my life had a new meaning. It seemed to me that this house was not just walls and a roof, but something much more. It was a return to myself, to those feelings and dreams that I had lost long ago. Elvira, meanwhile, had also gotten involved in the process. When the house began to take shape, her attitude changed noticeably. She chose wallpaper, furniture, curtains with passion. Sometimes her tastes seemed too fancy to me, but I didn't argue. It was important to me that this house was not just another place for her to live, but a real home where she could feel happy. Every evening, coming home from the construction site, I felt tired, but it was different, pleasant, satisfying. I no longer thought about the fact that I hadn't accomplished anything in my life. I now had a purpose, and that purpose gave me strength. It seemed that life was really starting to get better. When the construction of the house came to an end, and Elvira and I finally moved in, I was relieved that my life was beginning to take the shape I had dreamed of. The house stood by the forest with a wide plot of land and a view of the lake, in which the tall pines reflected. Every evening, I went out on the veranda, listened to the sounds of the forest, felt the fresh air filling my lungs, and thought that I had finally found a place of peace. I started fishing as soon as I got everything settled with the move. The lake had not changed. Its water was still dark and calm, as if it held an ancient secret. Here I met other fishermen, men of different ages. We often met in the early morning or at sunset, settled on the shore with fishing rods, chatted about life, exchanged stories. Over time, however, something began to change. I began to notice that fewer and fewer people were coming to the lake. At first it seemed random. Someone was sick. Someone had gone to the city on business. But week after week, the faces disappeared and no new ones appeared. Soon strange rumors began to circulate in the town. People whispered that something evil had appeared on the lake. Some said that it was the spirits of the forest, which at night pounced on fishermen and dragged them under the water. Others claimed that this local lake punishes those who gain their wealth not by the most honest way. Did you see they missed someone again yesterday? Old man William, one of the regular fishermen, told me one day. Jackson's missing. Took a boat out. Never came back. He liked to fish, but they say his money was dirty. Now he's paying the price. Do you believe these rumors? I asked him more out of interest. The old man just shrugged his shoulders. I don't know, son, but something's not right. Too many people disappearing, and all of them rich. Maybe they're really spirits, or maybe someone decided to finish the job for them. I grinned at the time, but that feeling of uneasiness, seeping unnoticed into the conversations, wouldn't let go. Every day, the rumors grew darker and darker. Some claimed to have heard strange sounds over the water at night, like moans or screams. Others said they saw a light deep in the forest, as if someone was walking along the shore with a torch. And though I didn't believe in these tales of spirits and curses, it made me wonder. I'd known the lake since I was a child. It was my own, and I'd never felt fear here before. But now there was something strange in the air, something that would not let me rest. The rumors about the lake were spreading wider and wider, and even those who usually didn't pay attention to such things began to worry. I wasn't as concerned about the village's chatter about spirits as I was that Elvira was now talking about it. She wasn't the type to believe in mysticism or gossip. Her words caught me off guard. How long can we put up with this? She said one evening, throwing her towel irritably on the chair. Every day there's this talk. Someone's missing. Someone's seen something strange. Don't you get it? Things are starting to get weird around here, and we're staying here for some reason like we have nowhere else to live. I looked at her in surprise. Usually she reacted calmly, and then suddenly she exploded like this. Elvira, are you serious? It's just a rumor. People will always think of something. You know, village life is boring, so they look for entertainment. And I'm not bored? She interrupted sharply. Am I an old granny to live in the middle of nowhere? I'm only 35. I still want to live normally to socialize with people. And you? You're not an old man either. Or have you decided to fish here for the rest of your life and forget yourself? Elvira, I started, but she didn't let me finish. My friends have already started to forget about me. Do you think I wanted to sit in this house all my life, even if it was beautiful, and watch you fish? I didn't say anything, not because I had nothing to say, but because her reaction stunned me. I thought she had long ago accepted this life, gotten used to it, but it turned out that all this time she had been saving up her irritation. You can't hear me, she shouted, and before I could answer, she ran out of the room, slamming the door so hard that the glass in the frame shook. We never spoke again that evening. Elvira closed herself in the bedroom, and no matter how much I tried to make conversation, she either kept silent or replied briefly that she was tired and wanted to rest. I had to find the shaving foam myself, because there was no point in asking her anymore. I opened the bathroom cabinet and, rummaging through her things, came across a box of birth control pills. I froze. My throat was dry, my thoughts swirling erratically. Why would she want it? Would stop talking about kids a long time ago. She knew it was a sore subject for me. I stood holding that box in my hands, moments of our lives flashing before my eyes. Something inside me turned over. So it felt like the whole world around me started to collapse like a house of cards. I stood in the bathroom, holding that box of birth control pills, and felt everything boiling inside. The only thought going through my head was, she's taking them because she has someone. Why else? We hadn't discussed any contraceptive methods, and there was no point in it. After what the doctor had told me, I had no illusions about the possibility of becoming a father. There were many questions, and each of them stabbed into my mind like a knife. I tried to find a logical explanation, but it was slipping away. The inner voice kept saying the same thing. It's cheating. She wants to be with someone else, but she's doing it in secret, so you won't find out. Inwardly pulling myself together, I resolutely walked out of the bathroom and headed for the bedroom. Elvira was lying on the bed, staring at her phone, and didn't even turn around when I walked in. Can you explain what this is? I asked coldly, tossing the box of pills onto her blanket. She looked up sharply, her face changing immediately. Surprise? No, more like confusion. She quickly grabbed the box and tried to hide it under her pillow. It's not what you think, she began, avoiding my gaze. Really? What am I supposed to think? You and I have been trying for years to have a baby, then I find out it's impossible, and now all of a sudden I find birth control pills on you? Do you even know what that looks like? I bought them for a friend, she blurted out, clearly not thinking her answer through. She had an important conversation with her husband, and she asked me to get some for her. I stared at her, trying not to snap. For a friend? Really? That's the best you could come up with? And you keep them in your bathroom cabinet? How convenient, right? You don't believe me? Her voice got louder, more hysterical. Do I have reason to believe you? I replied sharply. Look, can't you think of anything more believable? If you're gonna lie, do it a little smarter. What is wrong with you? Elvira got up from the bed, clutching the box in her hands. You think I have someone? Do you think I'm taking these pills because of a lover? Are you out of your mind? I stared at her in silence, barely containing my anger. The thought pulsed in my head, she's lying. I could see it in her confusion, in the way she struggled to find the words. If it's not for you, I began slowly. Then why didn't you tell me right away? Why did you hide the box as soon as I came in? I just dashed, she stammered, trying to think of an answer. I knew you'd take it the wrong way. You know how jealous you are? I just didn't want another scandal. Well, there is now, I replied harshly. Do you know why? Because you're acting like someone who has something to hide. She threw the box on the bed and screamed. I'm not hiding anything. You were just always looking for something to pick on. Yes, I wanted to keep it a secret because I knew you'd start sulking like this. You never believe me. You always think I'm up to something. I felt my insides clench. Elvira's words didn't convince. They only fueled the fire of suspicion. It was more like an attempt to avoid answering than the truth. All right, I said, looking her straight in the eye. If you're not hiding anything, why don't you explain normally? Why don't you tell me the name of this friend? Or maybe it's better to tell the truth before I start looking for her myself? Elvira was silent. Her eyes darted from side to side, as if she was looking for a way out of the situation. And at that moment, I realized that deep down I had already assumed the worst. She didn't answer. She just turned away and said, "You know what? Do whatever you want. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of you suspecting me all the time. If you want to think I'm cheating on you, go ahead." She left the room abruptly, leaving me alone. There was a heavy silence in the air, punctuated only by the sound of her footsteps. I stood still, feeling the anger and pain intertwining inside me. It all seemed too implausible, too artificial. I wanted to figure it out, to understand, but the more I thought about it, the stronger the feeling became that things were really out of control. I went to the lake alone. I spent the whole evening alone, sitting on an old wooden bridge with a fishing rod in my hands. At this time of day, there was usually not a soul around. The locals had long ago stopped risking going out on the lake after sunset. Rumors of mysterious disappearances and spirits of the forest did their job, but it didn't scare me. It didn't cut it. I just wanted to be alone and think. The water reflected the moonlight, dark, calm, serene, like a mirror. A light wind moved the tops of the pine trees, and somewhere far away the cry of a night bird was heard. I sat and looked at the still surface of the lake, and my thoughts seemed to run their course, intertwining, bringing me back to the past. Where did I make a mistake? I thought. Probably back then, in my 15th year, when I decided that the real life was noisy companies, partying, and alcohol. I followed imaginary friends, tried to be my own guy among those I don't even remember now. And the more I thought back to those years, the clearer I realized how much it had changed me. Instead of wandering the back alleys with them, I could have found Anna, tracked her down, and continued to be friends with her. I thought to myself. She was always talking about something bigger, about eternal values. But then, as a child, I didn't understand it. I thought it was all just empty words. But she was raised right. Her family lived differently, had a different outlook on life. But me, I didn't raise myself. I succumbed to other people's influence, ruined myself in my youth. How could such a man build something really strong and worthwhile? I thought about my life with Elvira. When we first met, I had been dazzled by her beauty and ease, her playful disposition. I mistook attraction for love and built a family on shaky foundations. But Anna had always said that a family needed real values: trust, respect, common goals. What did we have? We built a relationship on attraction. And of course, over time, everything fell apart, I thought, watching the float quietly rippling on the water. It was a strange feeling, a mixture of bitterness, regret, and understanding. I knew that nothing could be changed, but I kept thinking that if I had been a different person, things might have been different. I thought. Maybe that's why I'd chosen Elvira. She reflected the chaos that was inside me. If I had been different, if I had raised myself differently, I would never have chosen her. The wind picked up, rolling across the water, disturbing its calm smoothness. I took a deep breath of the cool night air and looked at the lake again. It was the same as it had been when I was a child. Nothing seemed to have changed, only I was different. Or maybe I was just finally starting to realize it. This was my place of power. I could feel the space around me protecting me, as if the native forest, the lake, and the evening wind had come together to give me respite. Here, on this old bridge, amidst the calm water and whispering pines, my mind was finally at rest. All worries, resentments, suspicions all seemed distant and unimportant. I thought that instead of blaming Elvira for her character or myself for my mistakes, it was better to start changing things. The main thing I finally realized was that we had reached an impasse. We can't go back to the way things used to be. The life that Elvira and I were trying to build was cracking at the seams, and it was obvious that either I would change something or everything would finally fall apart. With these thoughts, I continued to sit by the water, watching the float drifting on the surface of the lake. Soon I began to fall asleep. My eyes closed by themselves, but when I fell into a half-sleep, a slight sound of water or wind brought me out of it again. so I would fall into slumber and then come to my senses again. But at some point I could no longer tell whether I was asleep or awake. The images in front of my eyes began to confuse, and suddenly I saw something strange and disturbing. I was standing in front of my house. It was covered in dirt, with things strewn about, as if a hurricane had blown through it. The doors were wide open, and there were overturned chairs, broken dishes, and torn curtains on the floor. And in this ghastly scene of devastation, a man appeared. I couldn't see his face, he had his back to me, but something about his figure was hideous, frightening. His laughter sounded muffled, with an unpleasant wheeze, as if he were choking on his own gloating. "It's all mine now," he said in a hoarse voice, stepping inside the house. My insides clenched. I wanted to scream, to rush toward him, but my body felt paralyzed. I couldn't take a step. When I opened my eyes, I realized it was all a dream. But it left an unpleasant residue, a sense of something wrong. My heart was racing, and a chill ran down my spine. I looked around, it was quiet, with only a light breeze swaying the tops of the pines, and the surface of the lake as smooth as glass. But the feeling of unease didn't go away. This dream, strange and incomprehensible, made me wary. I decided it was time to pack up and go home. I got up from the bridge, gathered my fishing rod, put bait and small accessories in my backpack. All the while, a feeling of something wrong sat inside me, as if I had witnessed something I couldn't yet understand. As I was about to leave, something caught my eye. The lake, which a moment ago had been calm and clear, was now shrouded in a thick fog. A white, dense haze rose as if from nowhere, hiding the far shore. I stood staring at this sudden change, and the uneasiness inside me flared up again. The fog was so thick that it looked as if the lake had been swallowed up by something living. The night air felt damper, colder. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Somewhere far away, through the fog, there was a barely audible sound, either the splash of water or a muffled voice. I stood all alone, surrounded by this strange haze, and suddenly felt that I was on the verge of something incomprehensible, almost unreal. I walked slowly down the path, trying to ignore the thick fog that seemed to grow denser with every step. My legs shook a little from fatigue, and the cold air crept through my jacket, leaving an unpleasant damp feeling behind me. Everything seemed strange, unreal, like the dream that had just roused me from my slumber. Suddenly, right in the middle of the path, I noticed a silhouette. I stopped. A few meters ahead, barely distinguishable in the fog, stood a wolf. He didn't move, just looked straight at me. At that moment, everything inside me froze. My heart seemed to stop, and my thoughts were cut off. All I could think about was that now my attempts to change something in my life wouldn't even begin. Tomorrow morning, someone would find my body torn to shreds and think I'd been killed by a wild animal. But the wolf didn't move. He stood there, blocking my way, as if deliberately preventing me from passing. I stared into his eyes, and suddenly the fear began to fade. Those eyes, there was no aggression in them. On the contrary, there was something strange, deep, almost human in them. And for a moment, I felt like they were reaching right into my soul and saying, "I'm your friend. Remember me?" And I remembered. I remembered the wolf from my childhood dreams, the one I had imagined running through the woods in a race. His silvery fur, his blue eyes that always looked with some unspoken understanding. This wolf looked like the same wolf, but how was that possible? It was too strange, too implausible. I continued to stare at the wolf, not realizing if it was real or if it was some kind of dream again. We stood still for about 5 minutes, and all the while it seemed to me that something important was about to happen. But instead, the wolf suddenly stirred, turned slowly, and strode toward the forest. His movements were smooth, confident, as if he wasn't afraid of anything in the world. I stood still and stared after him, looking around in wonder, as if expecting him to return or for other animals to follow. But there was only silence. The wolf was hiding in the fog, and its silhouette gradually dissolved among the trees. And despite the uneasiness of what was happening, somehow I did not feel fear. On the contrary, I had a strange feeling that this wolf would not harm me. Rather, He had come to warn me of something. Yes, I must be going crazy. The forest spirits are starting to come to me. I thought to myself, grinning. If I told anyone about this, they'd put me in a mental institution. But the jokes didn't help. The feeling that this wolf wasn't an accident, that it had come for a reason, wouldn't let go. It all seemed too strange, but something inside me said, pay attention. This is important. With those thoughts, I looked again at the path that went deep into the fog and slowly made my way home, still looking back at the spot where the wolf had just stood. As I approached the house, I immediately noticed that the light in the living room was on, even though Elvira was usually asleep at this hour. The fog was clearing, but there was still a strange heaviness in the air from my encounter with the wolf. My heart was beating a little faster than usual, as if sensing something wrong. I walked quietly to the door, trying not to make any noise. When I opened the door, I heard muffled voices coming from the living room. For a moment, I froze. One voice belonged to Elvira, but the other, I didn't recognize the second one. It was rough, masculine, hoarse. I took a step forward and stopped behind the door jamb, listening. Are you sure he's not coming back? A man's voice asked, with a distinct note of concern. We're just getting started. I'd hate for him to fly in here and catch us. Sleep well, Elvira replied mockingly. I slipped him a sleeping pill before his fishing trip. If he's lucky, he'll drown himself in the damn lake, and I won't have to do anything else. Her voice sounded nasty, with some pride in her cunning. Then came her laughter, short, shrill, without a trace of the tenderness and warmth of her earlier laughter. But if he comes back, the man spoke again, his voice heavy and cynical. Then we'll kill him ourselves. We'll get rid of the house, sell it, and you'll live with me like a queen. I'd like to satisfy you every night, darling. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. It was unbearable to hear it, like something was tearing me up inside. You're the best man in my life, Elvira whispered, and I heard the rustle of her movements. Not like that boring loser. You have no idea how long I've dreamed that we could be together like this, without anyone watching. My breathing quickened. I could feel the fire burning inside me, a mixture of rage and pain. All these years I'd been trying to build a life with her, trying to create something real, and she, all this time, she'd been betraying me, scheming behind my back. I couldn't stand by any longer. Taking a step forward, I pushed open the door and stepped into the room. Elvira, who was perched on top of the man, jumped off him in a flash, her eyes widening with horror. She changed instantly. Her face, full of pleasure a second ago, was distorted with fear. The man rose from his chair, too, but he didn't look frightened. He looked at me as if this were just an unfortunate misunderstanding that he was about to solve. Edward, Elvira began, her voice shaking. It's not what you think it is. I stared at her in silence. The words I'd just heard were ringing in my head. All those caressing whispers, the plans to kill me, that disgusting laugh. I didn't need an explanation. I stood in silence, feeling everything boiling inside. Looking at Elvira, I suddenly realized that I didn't recognize her anymore. It was no longer the girl I had once loved. In front of me stood a stranger woman who had just discussed with some gruff type how to get rid of me. Not what I think, I said, trying to contain my anger, but my voice trailed off into a low, threatening tone. So, I didn't hear you say you were going to drown me? Or maybe I heard that bastard's ready to satisfy you every night? Look, kid, calm down. My lover cut in, getting up from his chair. He was solidly built, a little taller than me, and spoke with a cocky grin on his face. It's your own fault for bringing her to this. Women need men, not boring fishermen building a house in the middle of nowhere. I took a step forward, clenching my fists. Shut up, I said through gritted teeth. And if I don't? He continued, smiling mockingly. What will you do? Those words were the last straw. Without thinking, I lunged at him. The blow hit him in the jaw, and he jerked back, but he didn't fall. Cursing me, he struck back, his fist hitting me in the side, but I felt almost no pain. Adrenaline was rushing through my blood, and the rage had taken over me completely. We clutched at each other, pushing each other across the room. At one point, I knocked him to the ground, and we collapsed to the floor together. I was on top of him and started punching him, unable to feel my fists or the punches he was trying to throw back. My ears were buzzing, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst. "You nothing," he hissed through his teeth, trying to dodge the blows. "She never loved you anyway." The words only made me angrier. I grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and pinned him to the floor so hard he wheezed. Everything inside of me was screaming, "Finish him. Let him feel what it feels like." But before I could do anything, I heard quick footsteps behind me. The next second, something heavy hit me on the head. I felt a sharp pain, a flash of light before my eyes, and then everything went dark. The last thing I heard before I blacked out was my lover's husky voice. "That's it, sweetheart. Good for you. Now everything will go according to plan." Cold water whipped into my face. I slowly came to myself, weakened, barely able to move. Every movement was difficult. My body felt like absorbent cotton, and my head rattled like a bell. It took an incredible effort to open my eyes, but when I finally did, the world in front of me was floating and blurred. I was being dragged to the shore of the lake. My lover's hoarse voice echoed somewhere nearby. "Hold him tight. That asshole doesn't even realize what's going on. Can you imagine how many years he's been working on this house? And tomorrow, ITL, all be ours. Are you sure that he will definitely not survive?" Elvira's voice trembled, but there was no fear or remorse in it. Just excitement about how their case would end. "Calm down, my dear," replied the lover with a sneer. "Now I'll stomp him with the paddle, and it's done. Let's go home and finish our evening properly." I felt the cold water of the lake getting closer, my body sinking deeper. A wave came over my face, and I could barely breathe. He squeezed my neck, pulling me down as I fought for every breath. My arms were as weak as a child's. I couldn't fight back. The only thing I could do was hear them talking. "Did you hear it?" Elvira suddenly interrupted him, her voice trembling. "What now?" irritatedly muttered the lover, not stopping to press me. "It's probably a moose or a boar in the bushes. There's nothing to worry about. We'll be done soon, and we'll go home and continue our evening of pleasure." But the rustling came again. This time it was closer. Branches crunched as if someone had crept cautiously through the trees. And right behind it came a long howl, deep, cold, as if piercing the night through. "Did you hear it?" Elvira whispered, clubbing frantically a hair lower. She yanked him so sharply that he almost fell into the water. "Fool! What are you doing?" he roared, breaking free of her grip. "There's nothing to be afraid of. What if there really are spirits here?" she asked, no longer trying to hide her fear. "Did you believe your own lies?" He laughed, but there was tension in his voice. "We started those rumors to keep everyone away from the lake. There's no one here but us." But suddenly a wolf's face appeared out of the mist. The beast's eyes glowed in the semi-darkness, and its silvery fur glistened with moisture. The wolf stared straight at them without moving or making a sound, but its gaze was enough to make them both freeze in horror. A menacing growl was heard. Without taking his eyes off them, the wolf took 3 sharp steps forward. The beast moved smoothly, silently, but there was danger in every step. "Shit, run!" The lover squeezed out, dropping the paddle to the ground. Without looking back and forgetting about his beloved, he took off and raced away from the lake. "Wait!" cried Elvira, rushing after him. Her shout mingled with the sound of the wind and the crackle of twigs underfoot. "If not us, that wolf will eat him," the lover muttered under his breath, not stopping. "He wouldn't survive." Those words, spoken as if to reassure themselves, echoed in the air as they disappeared into the forest. Both of them ran like hunted animals, their footsteps and intermittent breathing disappearing into the night. They never wanted to return to that cursed lake again. I choked in the icy water, feeling a sharp pain split my head open. The air rushed into my lungs in spurts, as if each attempted breath could be my last. The water was everywhere, cold, merciless, clinging to my body like it was trying to drag me to the bottom. I couldn't understand how I had gone from the calm comfort of my familiar world to this hellish void. The wind roared over the lake, stirring up ripples in the water, and the pines on the shore bent under its pressure, creaking. I couldn't feel my arms. My body was slowly pulling me down, and only a vague warmth somewhere in my chest reminded me that I was still alive. Or maybe not anymore. My thoughts were spinning chaotically, making it hard to focus. Elvira. Her face, her voice, they came back to me like a whiplash. The smile that had so many lies hidden behind the affectionate words. How many times had I trusted that smile, looked into her eyes without noticing that they had long since lost their warmth? I closed my eyes, trying to put the image out of my mind, but instead I saw something else. In the darkness, a little farther from the shore, I noticed two glowing eyes. They were blue, bright, like two cold fires burning in the gloom. A wolf. He was looking at me, and suddenly I felt everything inside me fill with a strange, unfamiliar peace. The wolf jumped into the water. I couldn't move, couldn't fight, but there wasn't a shred of doubt or fear inside me. As he swam closer, I instinctively grasped his wet pelt. His fur was warm, as if in defiance of all the cold hell around me. He swam confidently, calmly, as if this was not in icy water, but in his native element. With each stroke, he pulled me closer to shore, as if I were his problem child who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I stared at him, not knowing if he was real or a figment of my dying mind. But one thing I knew for sure, he was saving me. I was lying on the cold ground, my whole body shivering. The wind was blowing through me, and my clothes were clinging to my skin, making it excruciatingly uncomfortable. I caught my breath and looked up at the wolf, who stood beside me, his blue eyes calmly watching me. "Thank you," I wheezed, feeling my throat dry and my voice sounding hoarse. I wanted instinctively to snuggle against the wolf, to feel the warmth of his fur for warmth, but at that moment I heard soft footsteps behind me. The sound was barely audible, like someone lightly treading the grass. I froze, and my heart pounded in my chest again. Slowly, I turned my head and was stunned by what I saw. There was a girl standing in front of me. She was like a living embodied memory, in a white dress, with long blonde braids and the same pure face, illuminated by the moonlight. I could not take my eyes off her. Anna ran through my head. It couldn't be real. She was about 15 years old, but she looked exactly like the Anna I remember from my childhood. It was impossible, and yet here she stood, as if she had stepped out of the past. "Don't be frightened," she said softly, her voice as quiet and calm as the whispers of the forest. "I am here to help you. Drink this, and your strength will return. Donne-moi cette question, donne-moi cette énergie. Just follow me, and I will help you." She held out a small wooden vessel to me. I stared at it, hesitating for only a second. But the look in the wolf's eyes, standing nearby, remained calm, and that gave me confidence. If he was calm, then this girl could be trusted. I took the vessel with trembling hands and took a cautious sip. The drink was warm, with a bitter herbal flavor. It smelled of something woodsy, fresh, as if it combined the flavors of all the herbs that grew around the lake. Warmth instantly began to flow through my body, spreading from my chest to my limbs. It was barely perceptible at first, but soon became stronger, awakening my lost strength. The pain in my body began to subside. My breathing became more even, and my heart stopped racing. "Thank you," I exhaled gratefully, feeling my mental clarity returning. The girl didn't answer, just nodded, indicating for me to follow her. I slowly rose to my feet, feeling my body begin to obey again. The wolf was still standing beside me, not a step away, as if guarding us. I followed the girl, not knowing where she was taking me, but somehow believing that she really wanted to help me. We walked for about 20 minutes, maybe 30. I lost track of time. The forest around us was thick, the darkness thickening, and only rare glimpses of moonlight filtered through the trees. The world seemed to have narrowed to a narrow path beneath my feet, beyond which there was impenetrable darkness. I had never been to this part of the forest. It was strange, for I had known these places since I was a child, and yet I had never come here. I remembered how Anna and I had stood on the other side of the lake, looking across to where the forest was receding into the horizon. We wondered then what was beyond the trees, but we never dared to go any further. Now, after all these years, I was finally crossing that boundary. The wolf had been walking beside me the whole time, not a step behind. He moved quietly, confidently, as if he were not just an animal, but a guard or a faithful companion to the girl. Sometimes he looked at me with his blue eyes, and there was no threat or anxiety in his gaze, only calmness. At last the trees began to thin, and soon we came to a small clearing. It was the end of the forest. In the distance we could see something open, perhaps fields, but because of the darkness I couldn't see further. In front of us stood a cottage. It was small, neat, with a porch on which hung a lantern. The light was on inside, and the yellow rays shining through the window curtains made the place seem unexpectedly cozy against the gloomy forest behind. "We're here," the girl said, quietly opening the door. The wolf went inside first, as if it were his usual place, as if he lived here. I followed. As soon as I crossed the threshold, I was immediately enveloped in warmth. The house smelled of cinnamon and some kind of baked goods. The smell, sweet and warm, filled me with a strange feeling, a mixture of surprise and relief. It was cozy inside. The small room at the entrance was lit by a floor lamp with soft, warm light. There was a patterned rug on the floor, and a round table in the corner with a few ceramic mugs and plates. The atmosphere in the house seemed to say, "You are safe here." I stood at the door, still trying to realize where I was and how I even got to this place. The girl quietly closed the door behind me and went inside without saying a word. The girl suggested that I sleep, saying that we would talk about everything tomorrow morning. "Rest," she said softly, pointing to a small sofa with a neatly folded plaid. "You'll feel better in the morning. And there's someone you'll need to talk to." I was too exhausted to ask questions. My head still buzzed and my body ached with fatigue, but the warmth of the room, the soft light, and the smell of cinnamon gradually lulled me to sleep. I lay down, covered myself with a blanket, and closed my eyes, feeling sleep roll in instantly, as if it had been waiting for its turn for a long time. I woke up in the morning to sunlight streaming through the curtains, filling the room with warmth. It was the first morning in years that I actually felt rested. No heaviness in my body, no anxiety. I lay there for a few minutes just enjoying this new-to-me state. But soon I was drawn to the smell of fresh baking and the quiet noise of dishes from the kitchen. Someone was already up and cooking breakfast. Just as I stood up, a girl came running into the room, the same girl who had brought me here the night before. Her face was glowing with joy, and she seemed excited but childishly happy. "You're awake already. How wonderful. Wash your face and go to the kitchen. Everything is ready." I obeyed her with a slight smile. I don't know why, but her energy was transferred to me. Without noticing, I also felt joy and lightness, as if all my problems were far away. I washed my face and cleaned up and headed for the kitchen, expecting to see the girl or one of her family. I froze when I entered the room. Standing at the stove was a woman my age. Blonde hair, cute wrinkles around her eyes that only added to her charm. But most importantly, it was still the same kind eyes that I would recognize from 1,000. I didn't have a shred of doubt. Anna was standing in front of me. "It can't be. Is it really you?" I exclaimed, not believing my eyes. She turned around, and a wonderful, warm smile shone on her face. In that instant, it was as if I was in paradise. Everything around me disappeared. Only her eyes, her smile, and this moment, which I will remember forever, remained. "Hello, my old friend," she said in her gentle but deep and refined voice, with the wisdom of her years. I went up to her and hugged her tightly. I was overwhelmed with emotion, and although I had always considered myself a reserved person, at that moment tears involuntarily came to my eyes. I couldn't remember ever being so happy to see someone. There was silence between us. It seemed as if we were both mentally back in time, remembering our childhood, when we were carefree children running along the lakeshore. Now, almost 30 years later, we met again, grown up, changed, but still so dear. I finally spoke. "So this is your daughter?" I asked, nodding toward the room where the girl remained. Anna smiled and nodded. "Yes, her name is Seraphima. She looks just like you, beautiful," I said, genuinely admiring this amazing coincidence. "But why do you let her walk alone in the woods at night?" Anna laughed quietly, and then calmly answered, "She was not alone. Elwyn was with her." "Elwyn?" I asked, frowning. "Well, yes, Anna nodded, still with the same calm smile. The wolf who saved you. He's always by her side. I asked Seraphima to go with him and help you. I didn't know what to say. Eldwin. The wolf who pulled me out of the icy water, who seemed like the living embodiment of something from my childhood dreams, turned out to be not just a wild beast, but something much more. We took him out when he was a wolf cub. Anna continued with a quiet warmth in her voice as she sat down at the table. His mother was killed by hunters. Seraphima found him in the forest, very small, and he was barely alive. He's been with us ever since. That's why he's been so loyal to us, especially to her. I glanced at the door where the wolf had disappeared, and for the first time I felt not fear, but gratitude. Eldwin wasn't just a beast, had actually protected them and saved me. How long have you lived here? I asked, not hiding my surprise. Yes, Anna nodded. After school, I went to the city to study medicine. Studying was easy, and I really got into it. Then I met my future husband, Seraphima's father. We got married. I got a job as a doctor in a clinic. Everything was going well until one day we decided to move back here, closer to nature, to the place where I grew up. She was silent for a moment, staring into the mug in front of her, and then, smiling a little sadly, continued. Now I work with women who prefer to give birth at home. I help them deliver babies, counsel them. That's why I wasn't home last night. I was with one of these women. I listened to her, amazed at how her life has turned out. She had time to become a doctor, to start a family, to find her vocation, and all this time she lived here in these places where I had not returned for so long. Where is Seraphima's father? I asked quietly, sensing that this question was painful for her. Anna looked away, her face darkening slightly. He died 5 years ago in a car accident. It was hard, but Seraphima and I got through it. Life goes on. She sighed and looked at me again. There was no more sadness in her eyes, just the quiet wisdom of someone who had been through a lot. But that's not what you need to think about right now, she continued more confidently. What are you going to do next? Her question caught me off guard. Until now, I hadn't thought about what would happen next. All the events of the last few hours, Elvira's betrayal, the meeting with the wolf, the rescue were too fresh for me to consider my next steps. After a few days, I gathered my thoughts and decided that I wouldn't back down again. Everything inside me was boiling, but that anger was cold, controlled. I knew I wanted to follow through and make Elvira and her lover answer for what they had tried to do. The plan was simple. I went to the police and told them everything, the attempted murder, the way they knocked me out, the fact that they threw me in the lake. Fortunately, the evidence was on my side. Clothes, signs of a struggle, and, most importantly, witnesses who had seen my car parked by the lake that night. The police immediately began an investigation. A couple days later, I walked up to my house with the police officers. My heart was pounding, but I kept my emotions in check. I had one wish, to see their faces when they realized I was alive. The policeman knocked on the door. Elvira opened it a few seconds later. She looked calm, even a little surprised when she saw the uniformed men. But when she saw me behind them, her face turned pale. Her eyes widened with shock, and her hands clenched into fists. "Edward," she breathed out, as if she couldn't believe her eyes. Her lover appeared behind her. His confident grin disappeared when he saw me. He tried to say something, but couldn't get a word out. "Didn't expect to see me alive?" I said coldly, looking straight into their eyes. "Did you expect the lake to do your dirty work for you? This is some kind of misunderstanding." My lover began, taking a step forward, but one of the policemen stopped him. "A misunderstanding?" I repeated, grinning. "You call it a misunderstanding that you try to kill me? You ran away, thinking you'd gotten rid of me. Now look who's back." Elvira was silent, but you could see from her face that she was panicking. The police officers began to handcuff them. She twitched, trying to break free, and suddenly screamed, her voice full of anger and hysteria. "You know what? Those birth control pills weren't from a lover. They were from you." I froze, stunned by her words. "What are you talking about?" I asked, feeling my insides clench. "I set the whole thing up," she shouted as she was dragged to the car. "I made you believe you couldn't have children, because I didn't want to have a baby with you." I stared at her, unable to believe it was all true. The cops put her in a car, her lover in another car. They shouted something, but I didn't listen. I just stood there and watched them go. A tear rolled down my cheek. All this time I could have had children. The dream I had buried inside of me turned out to be a lie, a cruel manipulation. That diabolical woman had deceived me in my innermost being. I stood staring into the void, thinking about how things could have turned out differently. But after a few minutes, another realization came. It's a good thing I didn't have children with her, I thought bitterly. She wouldn't have made a good mother. I saved myself and them from more evil. With those thoughts, I took a deep breath. I was free. Free from her, from this house, from everything that bound me to the past. Now I could begin to live again. 5 years later, we were sitting at the table in the yard of our house. Everything was just as I had once dreamed. A warm summer evening, the fresh smell of grass and flowers, a light breeze moving the leaves of the trees. Anna was sitting next to me, her eyes glowing with calmness and warmth. Seraphima was even more beautiful, a tall, slender girl with the same soft smile as her mother. Next to her sat her fiancé, a guy who was obviously crazy about her. And running across the grass was our 5-year-old son. Small, energetic, with an endless thirst for exploring the world. He would run up to the wolf and cuddle him like a big stuffed animal, and Eldwin seemed to meekly tolerate these clumsy but sincere displays of childlike affection. We laughed as we looked at this picture, and there was so much joy in that laughter that I wanted to remember the moment forever. And indeed, I thought, watching my son, whom I loved with all my heart and whom I had dreamed of for so long. Nothing is too late. The main thing is desire and aspiration. As soon as I changed my thoughts about the life I wanted to live, as soon as I reconsidered what kind of health and values I wanted to pass on to my children, everything around me began to change. I looked thoughtfully at Anna, at her calm face, in which I could read kindness and wisdom. Is this really love? So quiet, unobtrusive, without pathos and loud words. A love that does not require proof, but simply exists, filling every day with meaning. But something still bothered me. How did Anna know I would need help that night? One evening, when Seraphima and her fiancé had already left and our son was asleep, I asked her that question. The two of us were sitting alone on the veranda, enjoying the silence. Anna, I began cautiously. I've been meaning to ask you for a long time. How did you know I needed help then? She smiled, looked at me with a slight mystery in her eyes, and, taking a small sip of tea, answered. You won't believe me. Try. I smiled back. I had a dream, she began, her voice quiet but engaging. I saw you standing on the shore of the lake, alone, lost. There was a thick fog and a strong wind blowing from the lake. Suddenly, I felt that you were in danger. In that dream, I asked Elwyn to go after you. When I woke up, I knew it wasn't just a dream. I listened to her, holding my breath, listening to every word, smiling stupidly, like a child being told a magic story. There, she sighed, noticing my smile. I knew you didn't believe me. That's not true, I countered, looking sincerely into her eyes. I may not believe in some things, but I do believe in dreams. Don't you, Eldwin? At that moment the wolf, as if realizing it was him, rose from his seat and came toward me. He rubbed his muzzle gently into my palm, and I felt the familiar warmth of his thick fur. We sat like that in silence, under the starry sky. It wasn't just silence, but the kind of silence that is born of complete peace and happiness. I looked at Anna, at her sleeping son in the house, at the wolf lying at my feet, and thought that my life had finally found the meaning I was looking for.